Welcome back for yet another video in pre-season. Today, we are going after a topic that you probably didn't think was coming up, and that is the omission of Mohamed Salah from a variety of drafts, and the reasonings why. At first glance, this may seem like a very whack and stupid theory. However, I encourage you to at least listen to the first few minutes, and then see where you land. Not only do I showcase you 4 different drafts without him, and the strengths of them, but I also explain to you why, in the first place, this video is being created, and why he potentially may not be as good of a pick as some of us seem to think. With all that said, let's get into the real substance of the video, and consider subscribing, as we do have content coming every single day. Now, this video is not designed to get you to sell or buy Mohamed Salah. It is simply designed to get you to view the acquisition of arguably the greatest FPL asset of all time in a slightly different light. My aim is for you to understand that this isn't just a home run, and there are negatives attached to him. And not only do I showcase that through a variety of footballing methods, but also from a little story last season, which saw the world number 2 fade Erling Haaland. Now, the reason this video is here in the first place is because, if you saw yesterday's video, I had Mohamed Salah ranked as the number 2 midfielder, which really surprised me, because initially when I was going into the video, I thought I would only have to have him at first, and I would have to figure out the rest of the order. It was only then did I start to ask myself a question about Salah. I asked, why do I have him at first? What's so good about him? What are the negatives? And when I started to ask what are the negatives, I realized there were probably more than I initially thought. And that's what we're really going to get into in today's video. I already said, naturally, I'm very well aware of how good of an asset he is. But just maybe he's a little bit overrated in terms of what the general consensus is amongst the community. And thus, potentially, there is a strategy where you go without him and profit immensely as a result, because there is huge upside to this strategy of fading the player that people are most likely to captain in game week 1. Millions and millions and millions of people are going to do that. So in the construction of my last video, one thing I realized was this analysis and the reasoning behind my selection of Salah as my best player initially was very surface level. It was more so reliant on historical facts and nothing that really evaluated the new variables at play. For example, Arne Slot, Jurgen Klopp leaving, a new system, etc., etc., etc. Even Liverpool's recruitment this time round, or lack of it. And with all those variables in mind, is he as good of an asset? And have you gone past that analysis? Because if we're being honest, it's very unlikely. And it's a very natural thing, right? You see the best right winger in the world, great fixtures, proven penalties, and naturally you buy him, especially when Haaland doesn't have a captainable fixture in game week 1. But underneath that, is it as rosy? But before we jump into the footballing reasons behind the omission of Mohamed Salah potentially, I'd like to look at FPL Chai, and his emblem is the one in the top left corner, hence the SpongeBob character. But last season, about halfway through the year, he was world number 2. World number 2, and he never owned Erling Haaland. Now imagine you told someone that on Friday night, on the opening night of the season, when Haaland scored a brace against Burnley, and pretty much everyone had him captained, and he was 26 points up on the rest of the field. They would have called you crazy, but it shows that it is possible. He used the funds and he spread them elsewhere. It allowed him to be extremely aggressive because he had so much money in the bank at times that he could go from premium to premium, and the squad structure was not affected because there was no huge price tag in his squad. Naturally, Alvarez did a fantastic job at covering, but then it begs the question, can Szoboszlai, can Jota, can Nunes potentially do that at Liverpool? Or do we need Liverpool at all? Even with that good fixture on, are they going to be able to maintain the same standard? And it shows that there's more than one way to skin a cat. And it is possible. It has been done in the past. And if it's been done in the past, it can be done again. And Salah especially is probably going to have such a high ownership and effective ownership given his captaincy game week 1. That if you can get it right, and if it is the best strategy to fade him, well then there is an enormous upside to it. Now, the image on the left is potentially how Arne Slot could line up, and specifically what it's looking at is the system. For example, there's Gomez there at left back instead of Robertson, and these are the type of things that I'm not particularly focused about. But what I do want you to focus on is the system as a whole and the player positioning as opposed to the personnel. Now, one thing we saw at Feyenoord is his wingers, specifically his right winger, held width a lot of the time. Now, the left winger was allowed to come inside more and had a lot more combinations with the 8 or the 10, but the right winger held their width a little bit more. Now, does he do this with Salah? Does he do this with the greatest right wing in the world? Probably not, but it's not going to be the same as a Jurgen Klopp system, where we're going to have, for example, Firmino dropping in and Mane and Salah constantly penetrating those half space, making a huge volume of runs past the last line, and coming inside a lot, we could see them operate with width a lot more. And for example, Szoboszlai and Jones operating those 8-10 zones, and even Trent coming centrally and operating from there because he's so devastating from there. Salah will be effective pretty much anywhere on the pitch. And to be honest, it does make most sense for him to come inside and be in closer proximity to goal. But as we've seen with other managers, De Zerbi, Postecoglou, when they have their philosophies, and if they are stubborn with it, they won't surrender regardless of the player, regardless of the environment, regardless of the game. So this is something to note. Maybe we see a slightly different Mohamed Salah. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, how does Arne Slot's system and footballing philosophy and style translate to Premier League football? Because we're not in the Eredivisie anymore. We're in the Premier League. The level of intensity is significantly higher and the level of quality is significantly higher. Now, I'll use an extreme example of how that could potentially cause problems. Let's take Roberto De Zerbi, who I'm a huge fan of. If you were to use his system in, let's say, an under-21s league with the team that is the best in the league by a mile, and you were to play that type of football, well, they would score so many goals, and he would do so well. But then you give that system to Brighton, and you ask them to do it away at the Etihad, and all of a sudden the system, due to its flaws and the risk it takes, doesn't perform as well as the Etihad as something like a low block might. For example, this system works well in certain conditions, whereas another system will work well in other conditions. And these are the type of things we need to factor in. It's a bulletproof example, the one I've just given you, right? And Arne Slot's system is one that you cannot concretely say will translate brilliantly. Do you remember Erik ten Hag? Before he came to the league, the hype around him was huge about his footballing philosophy. But he even abandoned it, and he abandoned his style because of the quality of his players, the profiling of his players. They weren't right for him to play that system within this league because he knew he would get beat repeatedly. Best example, Brentford away, 4-0, and he changed it straight after that. So how does Slot's system really translate to the Premier League? That's yet to be seen. And will it do better than Klopp's? We're going to come on to that. The last thing is, how does the environment and the shifted environment change the player? Remember Grealish at Villa? Completely different player. Huge number of take-ons, huge number of wins in those take-ons. He would drive at defenses. He would have more actions in the final third and in more central spaces. He would be more fluid. He would drift more. But now under Pep Guardiola, he's become far more robotic. And he's looked like he's really lost that sense of life force when it comes to football, right? In his play, there's less swagger to it now. And I'm not saying that will happen to Mohamed Salah to the same extent, but you are taking away a pristine environment for him to thrive and an elite level manager. So again, can we not expect some sort of a regression? Is that not a fair conclusion? Again, things to think about. Again, I would like to say that he's a top player and a top asset. I'm not denying that for a second. I am simply trying to show you a different perspective and the fact that it isn't all roses when it comes to acquiring him. Borussia Dortmund have not won the league since Jurgen Klopp did his wonders and left, right? This is a special manager, and you're replacing him. But when you replace him and his system and his backroom staff, etc., and the feel around the club and the environment and the feel-good factor within the players, right? For example, Trent said he would run through a brick wall for Jurgen Klopp. You run through a brick wall for Arne Slot? Probably not yet, right? Because that sense of cohesion and love isn't yet there. And these players, they're humans as well. They feed off this, they thrive off this, and they will perform better in those conditions. So with a special manager gone, not just in terms of his footballing ability, also as a person, can you expect the same from Liverpool as a whole? Probably not, right? Is Arne Slot as good of a manager as Jurgen Klopp? Probably not as of now. Have they recruited? No, not really. So what's to suggest that they would get better? Arsenal look like they're getting better. City will probably get better given it's Guardiola and you'll find a new iteration, or they'll recruit. Chelsea have strengthened. Man United have strengthened. Spurs have strengthened. So what are you really expecting from Liverpool? An improvement? As of now, I think that looks very difficult to concretely say, yes, I'm looking at an improvement. And with all these things in mind, and if the side plays worse, he's likely to play worse. And I just don't think any of these things have been given the slightest bit of consideration. But I think they really need to be. Right, enough about the reasoning. Let's get into some teams. So I've got 4 drafts for you, and this is a variation of the 3-5-2 twice. Now, you obviously see the first one has 0.5 million in the bank. And a couple of things I'd like to say. I've got Petrovic here in both. They could very easily be Sanchez. And I actually think he'll start. But the hub have Petrovic's expected minutes higher. And thus the rating would be skewed if I had Sanchez. So just assume that it is Sanchez, but with the same predicted points. Okay. In this draft, I've essentially sacrificed Salah, got Saka, got a pretty strong midfield, and had the acquisition of Trent. And now my defense is super, super strong with Trent, Gvardiol, and Konsa. That's essentially what I'm doing here. I'm sacrificing Robinson and Salah for Trent and a small upgrade in the midfield, which I quite like. Like, you look at this team and it's really strong. And Saka's got fixtures which, as I spoke about yesterday, whilst they're potentially difficult for Arsenal, he could do quite well in. Then the second draft is quite similar. Instead of Trent, though, I put even more money into the midfield to acquire a second premium. So now I have Saka, Son, 2 premiums in the midfield, and Erling Haaland. I've also got William Saliba at the back. So again, another premium defender in arguably the best defense, if not unarguably, right? And I've got a really strong team, and there's still some depth on the bench. And the other thing is we've got a 4.5 million forward here that has a decent level of predicted points, and the general consensus around him in the Southampton side is pretty good. So you've got a very different team here, but both with 91% and 90% ratings, which looks very, very strong. And having 2 premiums in the midfield alone will give you some nice differential captaincy options at times. And if they were to do well, you could hold them long term, and thus the value you could extract out of them would be huge. So again, just something to consider. The other thing about these drafts is they've allowed me to maintain like a really strong core of like mid-price players. For example, Gordon, Eze, Isak are present in both. And then I get to exploit the good fixtures of Forest through a cheap enabling mid who has good expected minutes and has a very decent chance of returning. So all in all, for a 91%, 90 rated side, it's looking very strong. Plus the first one has some wiggle room with price rises coming game week 2 with 0.5 in the bank. Now, these are the 3-4-3 variants, but before that, you can obviously see this tool is very helpful. And again, as I mentioned previously, you're getting it at a very, very cheap price in today's market. Thus, I would really consider checking this out. You can do so for free with a link in the description. You can at least check it out and see how it plays, what you like about it. And then obviously, if you'd like to purchase, you can do so. But it's just something for you to consider. Now, this is a 3-4-3 variant, and I've got Watkins and Havertz, right? 2 strikers who I think could do very well, particularly the Arsenal man. I'm not in love with Watkins' first 2 fixtures, but a lot of the numbers say he's good. And this isn't so much about my opinion. It's so much about showing you what the algo says and taking things from there, just specifically with regards to these drafts. Again, you have a strong midfield, right? I've got the core midfield there of Gordon. I've got Saka in one. I've got Palmer in one. See, again, the lack of Salah allows me to facilitate Palmer and a Havertz and quite a strong defense with a very good core midfield. Personally, I prefer the 3-5-2 variant as for now. But if you are really bullish on Havertz or Watkins, particularly Watkins, I imagine if you're going down this route, then you can go in this way. And for the Havertz draft, you at least get 0.5 million in. If you would like some real in-depth analysis into these picks, for example, Gvardiol, Konsa, Gordon, Isak, Haaland, and why they're being selected in pretty much every team, then you can go to my first draft reveal, which was my first YouTube video pre-season. I'll link that in the description as well, and you can go there and check it out for some more in-depth reasoning. Same to the likes of Szoboszlai and Nkunku. With that being said, we are now at the end of the video. Again, I stress, I am not trying to call Salah a bad asset. I'm simply trying to show you another perspective. I'm not telling you to buy him or sell him. I'm simply trying to get you to think about all of the variables. And that's it. That's all I have for today. We will be back tomorrow for another video. I really enjoyed filming this. I really enjoyed making it, constructing it. The ideas that were presented, I really enjoyed thinking about them myself and then presenting them to you. So I hope you enjoyed. If you like these type of videos more often, quite theoretical ones, then please do let me know. I will, of course, be doing quite a bit of tactical analysis throughout the season, looking at systems, looking at patterns of play, and how they're going to affect specific players in specific systems. So do consider subscribing, as that is all for now, and I shall see you tomorrow. Goodbye.